My journey to fluent English began when I was 20 years old. I could understand some English, but not very well. My vocabulary was limited, my accent was thick, and I often had to think in my native language before attempting to translate my thoughts into English. This process slowed me down, and often people couldn't understand what I was trying to say. In short, my English needed improvement, but I was determined to find a way to change that. I knew that improving my English would open doors for better opportunities, especially in terms of jobs and social interactions. I thought to myself, what kinds of opportunities will I have if I don't master this language? That question alone was enough to motivate me to take my first steps toward learning English fluently. One day, while watching TV, I came across an advertisement for an English fluency coach. His name was Mr. Mark, and he guaranteed that his students could become fluent in English within a year. The ad claimed that students who followed his program would speak English better than those who had been learning for 10 years. It seemed like a miracle solution, but of course, there was a catch. Mr. Mark only offered private lessons, and the cost was steep, $50 per hour, far beyond what I could afford at that time. I wondered how he achieved such incredible results, but didn't even bother calling because I knew I couldn't afford his services. Instead, I thought to myself, if he can figure out a way to teach people English in a year, maybe I can figure out my own way too. That was the beginning of my journey. I went to the local library and borrowed as many books as I could find on English fluency. I decided to focus on books written by native speakers because I believed that learning directly from natives would give me the best insights. As I worked through these books, I kept a dictionary by my side to look up unfamiliar words. After reading about 10 books, I noticed a pattern. Many of the strategies repeated the same advice. Listen, read, use what you've learned, and build vocabulary. I tried applying these strategies, but I quickly realized something. While I was getting better at understanding English, my speaking ability wasn't improving much. Frustrated, I continued reading more books, hoping to find the solution I was looking for. In total, I read about 60 books, but they all seemed to offer the same advice, and none of it was helping me speak more fluently. After feeling stuck for a while, I decided to try a new approach. Instead of focusing on books written by native speakers, I turned to books written by non-native English speakers who had successfully mastered the language. These were people who had gone through the same struggles I was facing and had come out the other side fluent in English. To my surprise, the non-native speakers' books offered similar advice to the ones written by native speakers, with one important difference: repetition. They emphasized repeating what you hear over and over again until it sticks. This was something the books by native speakers didn't focus on as much, but it made a huge difference for me. Among all the books I read, there was one that stood out, but it wasn't even about learning English. It was a self-help book by David Johnson on success and goal setting. At first, I wasn't sure if it would help, but as I read it, I realized that achieving fluency in English was just like any other big goal. It required setting clear objectives, creating a plan, and staying committed. Inspired by that, I combined the strategies from both the native and non-native speaker books and created my own learning system, which I called the Fluent English Method. My method was simple. I would immerse myself in English every single day and repeat everything I heard until I could say it fluently. At the time, I lived in Chicago, and my daily commute to work involved a 50-minute train ride each way. I saw this as the perfect opportunity to practice. I bought a cheap Walkman and started listening to English radio shows during my commute. I'd tune in to National Public Radio, NPR, which had news programs that were perfect for learning formal English. There was a challenge, though. As soon as I entered the subway station, the radio signal would disappear. To solve this problem, I started recording the news every night and playing it back during my train rides the next day. I began whispering along with the recordings at first, but soon I started speaking out loud. The subway was noisy enough that no one could hear me, so I wasn't embarrassed to practice speaking out loud in public. In the beginning, I struggled. There were many words I didn't understand, and the news was spoken too quickly for me to keep up. But I stuck with it. When I came across a word or phrase I couldn't pronounce, I would rewind the tape and listen to it again until I could say it correctly. I repeated difficult words over and over again, sometimes saying them aloud 3 or 4 times before moving on. After 3 months of this daily practice, I decided to record myself speaking English to see how much I had improved. To my amazement, I was speaking more fluently than I had ever expected. My accent was still there, but it had softened considerably, and my confidence was growing. Encouraged by my progress, I adjusted my approach slightly. Instead of recording new news programs every day, I started listening to the same recording for an entire week. This allowed me to master every word, sentence, and tone before moving on to the next recording. By the end of each week, I could practically recite the news program from memory. After a month of doing this, I had mastered 4 full news programs, each about an hour long. The results were incredible. My fluency improved dramatically, and my accent almost completely disappeared. I was able to speak with the same flow and rhythm as the native speakers I had been listening to. Not only could I understand English better, but I could also finally speak it with confidence and clarity. Looking back, the key to my success wasn't just about learning vocabulary or grammar. It was about immersing myself in the language every day and repeating what I heard until it became second nature. That's the power of the Fluent English Method. Consistent practice and repetition. If you're struggling with learning a new language, remember this. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about persistence, repetition, and finding opportunities to practice in your everyday life. Whether you're commuting, walking, or doing chores, you can turn that time into valuable learning moments. Stick with it, and you'll be amazed at how far you can go mastering fluent English. My personal journey began when I reached my early 20s. I had a basic understanding of English, but it wasn't enough to carry meaningful conversations. My vocabulary was quite limited, my accent was thick, and I always thought in my native language first, translating sentences into English before speaking. Unfortunately, this method made my communication slow and difficult to understand. I knew my English needed significant improvement, and I was determined to find a way to change that. After months of consistent effort, I started to notice a major improvement. One day, while speaking with a friend over the phone, something unexpected happened. Midway through our conversation, my friend paused and asked, "What did you do?" Confused, I replied, "What do you mean?" He responded, "Your English, it's really good." The way he said good with such sincerity and warmth made me realize how far I had come. It wasn't just a casual compliment. It was a heartfelt acknowledgement that I had made real progress. A couple of weeks later, two of my cousins, both native English speakers, approached me and asked, "How is your English so good, but your siblings haven't improved?" This kind of feedback further solidified my belief that the effort I was putting into my English learning journey was paying off. But I didn't stop there. I continued working on my English fluency long after that moment. Even as life changed and my circumstances evolved, I remained committed to improving my language skills. Eventually, I developed a new strategy, which I called the open throat method. This method became my secret weapon for sounding more native in English. It involved speaking from the diaphragm, letting the voice flow naturally from the stomach, and opening the throat. This method helped me achieve a native-like fluency. I'll share more details about it later, but for now, let me tell you about an experience that confirmed just how far I'd come. When my son was in first grade, he invited me to be a guest reader in his class. His teacher, initially skeptical, was clearly worried that I might not speak English well enough to engage her students. I could sense her hesitation. However, once I began reading to the class, the teacher's expression completely changed. She looked shocked, her eyes wide open, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She was hearing. After a few moments, she smiled and even pulled out her camera to take pictures. She asked if she could feature me in the school's newsletter, and later she invited me to participate in more class activities. The reaction of my son's teacher confirmed something important. I had reached a new level of fluency, a level where I could confidently speak English like a native speaker. It felt empowering to know that people were not only understanding me, but also impressed by my fluency. The open throat method. So, what is this open throat method? As I mentioned earlier, it's a technique I developed to improve not just the pronunciation of words, but the entire flow of speech. It focuses on how you use your body to produce sound. Specifically, the key is to open your throat, speak from your diaphragm, and use energy from your stomach to project your voice. By doing this, you allow the air to flow freely from your lungs, making your speech sound more natural and less strained. I first heard about a similar concept from my daughter's school choir teacher. The teacher explained to the class that when people sing with a chicken throat, a tight, restricted throat, their voice lacks power and resonance. The same principle applies to speaking. When you're nervous or shy, you might unconsciously tighten your throat, making your speech sound awkward and hesitant. But by opening your throat and speaking with confidence, your voice becomes clearer and more powerful. If you're afraid of making mistakes while speaking English, you might unintentionally close off your throat out of fear or embarrassment. Let me tell you this. It's completely normal to make mistakes when speaking a foreign language. The key is to be confident, open your throat, and speak with energy. It's all part of the process of improving your fluency. The Fluent English Formula I also want to share with you a 3-step method I developed called the Fluent English Formula. This formula was instrumental in helping me achieve native-level fluency, and it's something you can follow too. Set your goal. The first step is to be clear about what you want. In this case, your goal is to speak English fluently or even at a native level. Setting a clear goal gives you a target to aim for. The word decide comes from a Latin word that means to cut off. Once you've decided that you want to speak fluent English, you need to cut off any distractions or doubts and focus solely on achieving that goal. The clearer your target, the easier it will be for your brain to guide you toward success. Take action. Setting a goal is important, but nothing will change unless you take action. It doesn't matter how much potential you have. The results come from what you do. When I decided I wanted to speak fluent English, I took action every day. I practiced speaking, listened to native speakers, and used every opportunity to improve. The same applies to you. If you want to speak English fluently, you need to take concrete steps toward that goal. Follow through. The final step is consistency. Once you've set your goal and started taking action, you need to keep going day by day. Just like lifting weights, you don't start by lifting 300 pounds. You begin with a small weight and gradually increase the load. The same principle applies to learning English. Start with simple conversations and small vocabulary gains. Over time, you'll build fluency little by little. When I first started working on my English, I took one small action each day. After a few months of consistent effort, I had improved so much that people were complimenting me on my English. The small daily actions added up to significant results. Conclusion. If you've ever felt nervous or unsure about your ability to learn a new language, remember this. It's not about being perfect on the first try. It's about setting a goal, taking consistent action, and sticking with it, even when progress feels slow. By using the fluent English formula and applying techniques like the open throat method, you can significantly improve your fluency over time. Whether you're practicing English on your commute, in front of a mirror, or with a friend, stay focused on your goal and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Those mistakes are part of the learning process. If you follow through with determination, soon enough, you'll find yourself speaking English with confidence, clarity, and fluency. The path to fluent English. My practice journey toward mastering fluent English didn't happen overnight. After 6 months of practicing daily, I began to see progress. My speech, once hesitant and broken, became smoother and more natural. But the journey didn't stop there. It was by building my fluency bit by bit, day after day, that I reached the level I wanted. After another 3 months of focused effort, I found myself speaking fluent English, something that once seemed impossible. If you work on your English just 1% every day, imagine where you could be 6 months from now. You'd likely have achieved a level of fluency you never thought possible. Let's review the 3 steps that form my fluent English formula. Set your goal, take action, follow through. These steps are simple yet powerful, and when followed consistently, they will change your life. As Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. The power of practice. The one-word secret, practice. Just knowing the steps isn't enough. Let me illustrate this point with a comparison. Let's say you want to learn Kung Fu. You've watched Kung Fu movies, instructional videos, and even observed Kung Fu masters. You know all the moves required to fight 10 opponents, but now you're facing 10 people in real life. Can you defeat them? The answer is obvious. No. Knowing the techniques is not enough. You have to train your body and mind to fight those 10 people. The same principle applies to speaking English. Simply knowing how to speak English isn't enough to achieve fluency. You have to practice, and I mean really practice. You need to open your throat, relax your tongue, loosen your muscles, and control the flow of your speech. You need to prepare both your mind and body for speaking English fluently. Just like Kung Fu, practice is the key. Where to practice? There are countless opportunities to practice. Let me walk you through some practical ways to integrate English practice into your daily life. On public transport, train or bus. If you commute by train or bus, you're in luck. These environments are excellent for practicing. When I was learning, I would find a quiet corner on the train and practice speaking out loud. I didn't whisper, because whispering won't help you build confidence or the right vocal habits. You want to speak out loud as if you're talking on the phone. In fact, in today's digital age, you can use your phone as a prop. Put on your headphones and pretend you're in a conversation. It's an easy way to practice in public without drawing too much attention. Buses are usually quieter than trains, which means you won't have to speak as loudly. However, remember not to whisper. Speaking softly won't engage your diaphragm or help you develop the throat and vocal control you need for fluency. In your car. This is by far my favorite place to practice. The car offers privacy and the freedom to go all out in your practice. I used to turn up the volume on English audio content and mimic everything I heard, from the tone to the volume to the rhythm. I would match the exact flow and expressions of the speakers I listened to. No one was around to hear me, so I could practice with full confidence, using hand gestures to reinforce my points. While today's technology makes it seem like you're just talking on the phone, I still closed my windows to avoid any strange looks from passers-by. The car is where you can practice at full speed. Just remember to practice your speaking, not reckless driving. At home. While cooking or doing chores. Do you cook at home? I do, and I found that it's a great time to practice English. Whether I was preparing breakfast or dinner, I used that time to put on my headphones and practice speaking. Cooking is such a routine activity that it frees your mind to focus on language practice. And it doesn't have to stop with cooking. You can practice while cleaning, doing laundry, or other household chores. During outdoor activities, going for a run, jog, or even just walking around the neighborhood can be a great opportunity for practice. Use your headphones and repeat after native speakers, focusing on pronunciation and intonation. Physical activity combined with mental focus enhances learning and can make the practice feel less tedious. Choosing the right materials. Now that you know where to practice, let's talk about the materials you should use. Choosing the right content is critical. The materials you select will determine whether you learn to speak correct English or incorrect English. The first choice you need to make is whether you want to speak British English or American English. The two accents are different, and if you want to speak like a native, you'll need to choose one and stick with it. Don't mix the two. Pick one accent, focus on it, and immerse yourself in materials that use that accent consistently. Once you've mastered one, you can go back and learn the other. But until then, concentrate on just one. Bruce Lee once said, "The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus." This applies to learning English too. If your focus is scattered, your results will be scattered. But if you focus on one accent and one set of materials, your progress will be sharp and noticeable. Once you've chosen your accent, it's time to pick the right materials. You want to learn from native speakers in real-life situations. Watching movies, listening to podcasts, or even imitating daily conversations will help you develop the kind of English that native speakers actually use. Practice. The key to mastery. Remember, practice is the one-word secret to mastering English fluency. Whether you're on the train, at home, or in your car, make practice a regular part of your routine. Use the time you have wisely. Little by little, your fluency will build, and one day, you'll speak English as confidently as a native speaker. Now get out there and start practicing. You already have everything you need: a clear goal, the tools to take action, and the persistence to follow through. Mastering English is not just about knowing the language. It's about practicing it consistently and deliberately every day. Once you've made this decision, you should gather materials that align with your chosen accent. For instance, if you decide to focus on British English, choose books, videos, and listening materials that exclusively use British English. This approach will ensure consistency in your learning and help you develop an authentic accent over time. The same rule applies if you choose American English. Pick one, stay committed, and avoid switching back and forth, as this could hinder your progress. Once you've mastered one accent, you can explore the other, but focus on one until you've achieved fluency. Imagine you're standing in front of two boats. One will take you to British English, and the other will take you to American English. Both will take you to your destination, but you can only sit on one boat at a time. The decision is entirely yours, and both options are equally valuable. However, remember that once you get on a boat, you must stay on it until you reach your destination. Switching boats halfway will only delay your progress. Exposure to authentic language use. A key aspect of sounding like a native speaker is exposure to authentic language use. Make sure the learning materials you choose reflect real-life conversations by native speakers. For instance, instructional materials that feature overly formal dialogues are not representative of how people actually communicate in daily life. For example, while a textbook conversation might read, "Mr. Wong, this is Mr. Chen. How do you do?" In real life, people would say, "Hey Dan, meet Bill. How's it going, Bill?" Focusing on natural language in everyday situations is essential. Look for podcasts, shows, and books that show how native speakers interact in the real world. Materials that use unrealistic scenarios or outdated language won't help you develop practical speaking skills. Find resources that are current, authentic, and reflect how people actually talk in informal and formal settings. Practicing with technology. While practicing, use whatever tools you have at your disposal. In the past, learning was often more challenging because technology was limited. Learners had to rely on basic audio devices such as Walkmans to practice listening.